Hello, this is Dr. Rosie Kuhn, and this podcast series is called Aging Like a Guru, Who Me? One of the most fundamental elements of aging is that aging comes to an end in the transition into dying and death, death of this body. And the question of, and the conversation about, do we continue on as a spiritual being, and how are we influenced about that? How are we influenced about that conversation in how we live our life? Freud was one of the first people to that we know of that said, hey, death is actually one of the major influences of how people live their life, the fear of death. And the interesting thing for me, and the point of this conversation already, is that we die many, many times, or the sense of our identity of who we thought we were, the identity of who we think we are in this physical body. We die many, many times. The identities that we take on, that we grow into, transition, especially through aging, as we grow older and we have identities as a youthful, active, productive, creative person. Quite often some of those aspects leave us, and we're scared of who we're becoming. And this is true of forever in terms of who we're becoming. And part of the process is that we're given many opportunities to transition. I'm seeing dying as transition. We're given many, many opportunities to transition from one form of being ourselves to another form, as in, first I'm an innocent child, and then I'm most likely taken to school, and now I'm learning how to be something else. And quite often we lose our sense of innocence. We lose our sense of identity of who we are as this being, this divine being, and we start to have to structure ourselves based on what our consensus reality tells us we should be. In most public schools or most school systems, try to structure us so that we're productive in the way that we're taught to be productive, and we lose that identity, or we put it on the back burner of who we know ourselves to be as a divine being. When we transition to from a single person to a person that's in love, going steady, getting married, we transition from the person that we are as a unique individual into a relationship that is coupled. And we transition ourselves in terms of forming who we think we should be to maintain and sustain and maybe even grow a relationship. This happens when we become a parent. If we become a parent, we become this person that is different than just the being, the divine being. And I think our practice is, I talk about parenting as a spiritual practice, or relationship as a spiritual practice, or careers as a spiritual practice. We all have an opportunity to see who we are as a divine being in any one practice. But we usually lose that divine sense of self and go into the pragmatics and the productivity and the structure and the routines of what it is we're supposed to be. This is true when we go into a career and we become what we're supposed to become, so that we create security and stability in that career. And quite often we lose a sense of identity of who we are, and we take on the identity of, oh, I am my job, I am my career, I am the brand of the company I work with, I am the money that I make, I am the house that I buy because of that. I am the fluidity and the flexibility because I have this job. So jobs end. Most times, it's a 50-50 chance of divorce for people. So there's the divorce, so marriages end. There's a lot of endings in our life that we don't see as a point of transition. Our children grow up, empty nests. There's a transition there that we necessarily weren't expecting would be challenging and difficult to our identity of who we are. And the point is that who we are is we are this personality, this structure that we've created. But who are we when all of the identifying elements disappear? Who are we when we are off stage from all of the roles that we play? and I've talked about this before, but there's an annihilation quite often of the structure of who the identity, in a sense, what our ego wants us to see ourselves as. And, too often our consensus reality has trained us well in terms of these dynamics to be productive. But we've lost, even if we're going to church and we're following spiritual traditions, we may have lost our sense of who we are as a spiritual being, as the being within all of the humanness that we take on. So the reason I bring this up in this way is to sort of say there's so many times in your life where you have transitioned and gone through loss and gone through scary things. A client of mine is losing her job, and it's and I think that anybody who's losing their job, it's terrifying because there's an identity and there's a security and stability that has been created around that position, as if that is what defines my stability and my security. And so quite often and in retirement, there's an identity and a productivity that we have identified with environments and people and communities, and that shifts. And so there's many, many times that we go through a death. Cancer is so prevalent these days. It's an epidemic. And part of that is it gives us an opportunity to it's a moment where we're given this sentence, if you will, a death sentence, even though quite often it's not necessarily meaning you don't have to die from cancer, but that's our first thought is I'm going to die, just like if I lose my child or a spouse to death, or a situation that it feels an annihilation to my being. I feel like I'm dead. And that's not unusual. It's part of our existing in our humanness. So this process of learning how to be with death, how to be with dying and transitions is something we've been through over and over and over again. And even though with my client who's losing her job and I say, you're going to be fine, you're going to come out the other side, it's no different in my perspective in terms of the dying of our physical self. Is our spiritual self is going to come through the other side just fine, and even better than you can imagine. So there's many, many times where we go through, and those people who have gone through having children, going through divorce, going through empty nests, going through the transitions, the loss of identities, getting to this place, menopause, that's another place where it's like, all these places where people who've had the experience can say, you're going to get through this just fine, and you're going to be better than you can imagine on the other side. For me, this is a really important element of living in our aging, aging like a guru, is we accept that the letting go of our body is just a transition to the other side. And that can be really, really scary. I've done a lot of research, and as I mentioned previously, I am part of an organization called ASSIST, the American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences, assist.org. And so I do a lot of research about people who have gone to the other side and communicated with people on this side. It's wonderful. I think it's wonderful because it really does allow us to see the transition is, yes, the body may be gone, but we continue to be ourselves in our essential nature, and we get to grow into that and become more of who we already are in the divineness of that, not in the limited elements of what we think we should be. So that divineness and the excitement, to me, that's exciting because it's like, oh boy, I get to be the fullest expression of myself on the other side when I transition. And I also get to say, okay, if I get to do that there, why not start doing it here? Why not start to create that openness and the expression of that divineness here, and bring more balance of that here now, as opposed to being in fear here and fearing the transition and living in fear and, in a sense, being afraid of living. A lot of people are afraid of living because they're afraid of dying. They're afraid to go on vacation. They're afraid to retire. They're afraid to leave what they know because they don't know who they are on the other side. And so they're afraid. So if we're afraid to die, most of us are afraid to live. So just want you again to be curious about what's the degree to which you live in fear of death, and how does that influence how you be in your world today? How does that influence the degree to which you play and love yourself into creation? Love yourself into, hey, I love myself, and this is what I want as an expression of me, not as the identification of what I should be as a mom or as a partner or as an employee at a company. This is who I am in my whole expression. So I'll leave that with you and leave you with that today. Please feel free to check out my website, theparadigmshifts.com. I've got lots of books there that are interesting. One book in particular is called sorry, You Know You're Transforming When. It's 101 ways that you can see, oh, I'm already transforming. I'm in the process of that. It's a fun, playful book. All right. Big hugs to you all. Many blessings, and bye for now.